and welcome everyone to This is Recruiting, a series focused on helping tech recruiters and HR professionals around the world to find actionable insights and tips from fellow recruiters on how they can take recruiting to the next level. I'm your host, Sachin Gupta, the founder of Hackerearth. At Hackerearth, we have a vision to match developers to the right opportunities across the globe through accurate coding assessments, remote interviews, and virtual hackathons. For today's discussion, we have with us Mary Hartberg, who is the Director of People Operations at Close.com. Welcome, Mary. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing really well.
Mary, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Close.com and also about the organization?
Yeah, so at Close, I'm the Director of People Operations, so I oversee the recruiting and onboarding process as well as a few other functions in the company. And I've been with Close for a bit over 5 years now. Grown the team from about a little over a handful, 6-7 people, to we're about 42 now. And Close is a CRM built for salespeople by salespeople, and we're designed specifically for small to medium businesses.
Nice. So I believe that Close was, initially not really remote, but it has over the years become a fully remote organization. So, how did that happen? And could you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I was just mentioning to you before, is that the original team was moving into a remote workforce was a totally organic process. The founding team was up in Silicon Valley, and they did have one person that was working out of Thailand at the time, but they're a real international group. And so they were traveling a lot and realized that they could still be effective workers without having to be in the same room. And so they kind of tested this, and I joined, and I didn't live in the Bay Area, and that seemed to work. And we needed a support person in Berlin or in Europe to support our customers there. So we hired someone in Berlin, and that worked really well. And so it just kind of became this organic process, and we started hiring people as we needed where they seemed to fit. And that worked really well. And so now, eventually the founding team ended up leaving Silicon Valley and moving into areas of the world that maybe suited their lifestyles better. So
that's super interesting. Obviously a lot of you kind of at Close have organically grown to be remote. But given the current scenario, a lot of organizations across the world are thinking about going fully or partially remote. So I'm sure the audience today can learn tons from your experience, having set up processes and grown, at Close. So tell us a little bit about your recruiting process. How is it set up? And, if you could talk a little bit about aspects that are particularly suited for remote hiring, are there things that you keep in mind from that perspective?
Yeah. So we're a really small team at Close. So we actually host all of our recruiting internally. And we created a process that was mindful about the balance of respecting our current team members' time, because they're the ones that are doing a lot of the process. And then also treating each candidate as though they are going to be a potential team member. So really holding a lot of care for both people that are involved. So how we've really set up our process is, I would say we try to be very organized and very thorough in what we're doing, but also very effective. So just going by logistically, our application process, this is where I see the remote hiring being quite a bit different than maybe a different sort of brick and mortar hiring, is that the application process, we actually use the application as our first interview. We collect resumes, but we also have at least 5 questions that are very specific to the role, that are quite in depth actually. And then we have a handful of other general questions that we look over too. And so we really want people to invest time into that first application, because we invested a lot of time in going through and vetting those. Whereas I think there's a lot of opportunities where you can just click and put in your resume, but we actually want you to go a little step further, because we see that as the first interview. Do you want me to keep going and telling you a bit more about how we go through? Yeah. So then we'll do the first interview, and that's usually hosted by a colleague of the team that you would be working on. And that, goes over your general experience and maybe some technical questions depending on the role. After that interview would be a take-home project, and that's something that we like to do early on, and that gives us an opportunity to see what like it's a replication of like a real life scenario that we've had at the company before. So we would know how to solve for it. And it just gives us a good idea about skill set and communication during that time. After that, we do another interview that's usually hosted by the manager of the team, and it goes more in depth into that take-home project and work experience. And then we offer a culture call, and that's the one that I usually host. And I have a few specific questions that I'm looking for, but it's mostly an opportunity for people to ask me questions about the company, the culture, the product, like anything they're curious about at that time. And then sometimes we'll do a third call if necessary, or if there's more questions, but then we'll go into a founder call. So we're still a small enough team that the founders, one of them will be involved in that last process. And then we do reference and background checks and offer. So, and then sometimes, depending on the role and availability, we will sometimes do a trial or a meetup in person. We've started to get more into those patterns, like if it is available for them to come to, you know, a meetup that we're having, or it's available, then we'll try to host that as well.
Got it. That's a fairly elaborate and well-designed process. So you mentioned that you kind of ask people to put in a few responses right in the first step when they're applying. And I've seen that elsewhere as well when it comes to companies who've been always remote. So does that lead to a drop-off in terms of applicants? Because not all of the applicants would be interested in like filling up a detailed form, or is that something that you've not really struggled with?
It might, but if you self-select out of the process, that's your choice. So we want people that are really interested and that will take the time to fill this out, because, and something I'll probably mention as this interview goes on, is that the amount of applicants you get for a remote position are very, very high compared to maybe something that is more location specific. So this is something that we have found over the years really helps our team from the very beginning in being able to vet quality candidates. And so if somebody wants to self-select out of that process, that is absolutely their choice. But we tried to create it to be mindful about our team as well. So,
so when it comes to interviewing, is there anything that while you're doing interviews for remote roles, are there things that you keep in mind or that you kind of want to cover on, which you may not be very, very particular about when you're hiring someone for an on-site role?
So I would say the things that we're looking for that may, or the questions that I might be asking. One of them, I think a big thing that I'm always looking for and that we're trying to be aware of is trying to gain an understanding of self-discipline. So I always ask, like, what are some areas outside of work that you have discipline around or that you're committed to? Remote work by nature gives an extraordinary amount of freedom, and the way that it's successful and why it works is through self-discipline. So that's something I'm always trying to gauge, like where are some other areas in their life that they might be really committed to. That would be one of them. Another thing that maybe you ask in a traditional work environment, but that I'm looking for a certain response at times, is what are you most excited about for the role? And something that comes up if being remote is talked about over the function of the job and the career and the passion for their role, that's something that I have a little more curiosity around, because I want to make sure that people are excited about their career and their job and the company. And remote is something that's a good aspect of all of this, but I don't want remote to be the driving force and then trying to fit in, well, what job would suit me there because this company is remote. So we really want to build a team of people that are passionate about their job and their career.
That's pretty insightful. Yeah. You want people to come in for the role and not really because it's remote. So that makes
exactly.
Sense.
Yeah.
So in your experience, when you're hiring for such remote positions, Is it? I don't think you would, kind of not qualify people who have not worked remotely in the past. But have you seen a pattern where people who have worked remotely tend to clear the interviews and kind of come in? Is there any correlation between whether the person has worked remotely in the past versus how they, get through the process?
So they might understand that sort of environment and if they're going to thrive in it or not. A lot of people figure that out pretty quickly. And so it's not a deal breaker for us if you haven't worked remotely before. It's whether or not you're willing to make those adjustments and kind of learn best practices and habits around how to communicate really effectively and how to set up your day. And so I think people that have done it before, where it's like tested and tried, like I've done this for 4 years. I know what I'm doing. That gives me a greater sense of ease, but it's not a disqualifier by any means if you haven't done remote work before.
Gotcha. So have you personally in your career been working remotely before close, or was this the first time you came into a remote role?
So before close, I was working on boats. So that's a different version of remote, being at sea. So essentially I was living and working from the same place. There's just no real separation of work-life balance. That's not really a concept in that world. So when I moved ashore, it was like creating that divide was a new experience. So I've been at close for a bit over 5 years. And that's the only true, in the sense of what we're talking about now, remote work, that's the only experience that I've had.
Gotcha. And when it comes to, and I know you kind of touched upon this in the previous question, that your focus is more on making sure that the person is fit from a roles perspective, right? They have the skills that you need them to have in order to perform well at the role. But there is obviously this element of the person coming in and fitting into a remote working environment, right? You don't get the social interaction. Communication requires a different cadence, and you spoke about self-discipline. Are there any traits which when people exhibit, or let's say don't exhibit, they are either strong qualifiers or strong disqualifiers for you? And I'm not looking for like tons of them, but even a few insights on what could be some of our recruiters kind of learn from your experience.
Yeah, I would say one of the big things that I've learned over the years is when we talk about communication skills and having good communication skills, being proactive about your communication is one of those things that I have tend to notice more over the years, that if I'm constantly having to follow up with somebody, even if they're like, let's say they have a really good skill set, if I'm the one that always has to be pressing on them and the one that's proactive, that gives me a little bit of a signal about what they might be like to work with. So I'm always looking for people that are telling me, you know what, I said I would have this project in at this date, but it's actually going to be 1 day later. Just those kind of things. It's like, oh, that's wonderful. That's okay if you can't get the project in tomorrow, like you said you would, but you communicated that. That's a win for me. I'm looking like those are really good things to take note of. And what you were talking about before, the disciplined people that take ownership and accountability, those tend to be like a big thumbs up for me. I think that's kind of a personality or a character trait that I'm looking for as well.
Interesting. And just sort of my curiosity, is there also, because you also mentioned that you are involved in the onboarding. So are there specific things that you put into place from an onboarding perspective to make sure that, because people are distributed globally, but they still kind of get assimilated into the work culture and the work environment?
Yeah, so that's onboarding is something I've grown increasingly passionate about, because it's something that I failed to do in the beginning of when I started hosting recruiting. Is there's the onboarding for the job specific function of the role, but there has to be just as equal onboarding for the product, the team, the culture, the company, all of those things. So now we have a good workflow set up that takes people through that so they can get familiar, because you don't have that office that you can go into where it's like, here's your orientation day or your orientation week. We try to take that all virtually and make sure people get as much context about the company as they can from the day that they start.
Right. So would that mean that there are tons of, not tons of, but a lot of video sessions that you would do typically in the first 2-3 weeks of the employee on joining the organization?
Yeah, and a lot of it is, we really believe in asynchronous communication and recording so a lot of the things that we have people watch are recordings from our team retreats or reading an article that maybe Stelly, our CEO, has written. A lot of it is more evergreen information that I just keep updating, that they can go through the process themselves. And then they do have calls with people, like significant people that they'll be working with that might not be on their immediate team. And then we also set up coffee chats every other day when they first start, where team members can fill in if they want to have a coffee hour with them. So that's a really fun way to get to know people as well.
Interesting. In your experience, what are the mistakes that recruiters make when it comes to remote hiring? And if you could talk from your own experience as well, if you remember something that you kind of you did it and you thought, oh, I'm not going to repeat this again. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I think kind of touching on that, that how you don't have the opportunity to come into an office and get in a feel of what the working culture and the environment looks like. I think failure to properly represent that through the interview process is something that happens quite a lot, and that's why I think it is so important to have someone internally that's responsible for hiring, because they're the most effective way in being able to relay the culture of the organization. Because I think representing that true working environment is a really hard aspect when you're trying to communicate what this remote working environment looks like for someone, because every remote company is going to be different, just in the same as every office that you would go into is going to be different. So I think that's something that we're still learning how to communicate better, but we're mindful about it now. So I think that's something. I think another area is cutting the interview process short, because they want to maybe represent or replicate that like day-long interview at the office or that sort of a process. I sometimes do hear, wow, these are a lot of calls, or this, when I mentioned we do 3 or 4 calls, a lot of people think, wow, that's exhaustive. But the reality is what we're trying to do is allow you to see all the different various people of who you might be working with. And I encourage people, ask us all the same questions at the end of, we always offer that opportunity at the end of an interview to ask questions. Ask everybody, see what they all say to the same question. That's a really good insight for a candidate to understand the culture.
Interesting. So the 2 things that you kind of touched upon, I have follow-ups on both of them. The first is, how as a recruiter, it's very important that you communicate what the culture is. And I completely empathize with that, because when you're doing an on-site interview, that's really the time when the person, as soon as they walk in, I think they get a lot of feel about the organization. They see people, they feel the culture. It is extremely hard to replicate that in a completely virtual environment. So are there like hacks that you have identified that help you do that? Any communication that you share with them, anything that you do throughout the interview process that has worked very well for you?
Yeah. So what I just mentioned, how we intentionally have people talk to different people throughout the team. That's very intentional why we do that. I also have a guide to us, like get to know us document that I send candidates later on. And that goes over a lot of what our values, our policies, stuff like that. We have a few videos. We've made videos on team retreats. We have a culture video. These are all trying to give people insight into what it would be like to work at Close. So those are some of the things we do. And I think having that culture call is critical when it comes to a remote hiring process, is allowing candidates an opportunity where they can just ask those questions. That's what the interview is about. It's not technical questions. It's not diving into work experience. It's purely like the opportunity to ask questions for culture and company. And so I think that's important.
Got it. And so would you share this material like early in the process, or would this typically come at later stages?
So a lot of the things, the videos, all of that is available right now. If you go on our About Us page online, you'll see the videos posted on there. You'll see what our values are. So a lot of this is available on Glassdoor, LinkedIn. So you can search for us and you can see a lot of these. And that's what I've also tried to do, is to build a a profile that people, when they go to different websites, that they'll be able to see more about us. And the guide to us that I send at like a little bit further in the interview process, because it's a bit more granular with this is how much work, or like our PTO policies and health insurance, these are the offerings, stuff like that.
Got it. And then about the interviews, you said you try to keep them in a less number of interviews. So typically in an on-site environment, folks like to do like full day interviewing, right? Like back-to-back interviews all stacked up.
Yeah.
So do you space them out, or do you kind of follow the same approach, just that they are virtual?
We try to work, because we're working across multiple time zones with multiple schedules. We try to get it so that people can schedule within the first like schedule and then have a few days in between, because we're also, the interviews are contingent. The next interview is contingent on how you did on the first interview. So we want a little bit of time to talk internally about that process, and then I'll reach out and you schedule the next interview. So there is some a bit of back and forth there. So you wouldn't typically have an back to back in a day. They're usually spread out over the course of a couple weeks.
Got it. So overall, what's your take on remote work? You've been doing it for the last 5 years. What's your advice, or what's your take for our audience?
Yeah. So personally, I love it. It works for me. It allows me the freedom to have a fluid lifestyle. It's the little things like being able to go for a jog in the afternoon. It's the big things like being able to visit my folks in Minnesota for a month at a time. I think that remote work gives me the flexibility and opportunity to be more available for the people I love. And that is something that's so important to me. And I don't ever want my job to hinder me from being able to be there for people. And so that's like the priority in my life, is that I want to always make sure that I can do that. It's not for everyone. Right. I think a lot of people would struggle in a remote environment. They do want more of that structured, the space they go to, the camaraderie day to day with their work colleagues. So I do appreciate that. I think since the global pandemic, it's become much more attractive. And I hope that companies take the time to develop their cultures remotely, because it isn't really the same as an office. Right. You just have to be like extraordinary deliberate about culture in remote work. So culture is going to happen regardless. It's just whether or not you want to create a certain type of culture for your team in the remote space. And that takes a rather significant amount of effort and somebody dedicated to that. Yeah.
All right. So the thing I take back from that comment is, you have to be deliberate. And it's not the first time I'm getting that. The last time I was speaking with someone, they spoke about how it's important to be intentional, and both of them are effectively the same thing, right? Yeah. You've got to be very mindful that there are people distributed geographically, and being inclusive and deliberate is important. So that's great. Yeah. So given the pandemic, do you think remote first is going to become like a trend that a lot of organizations will adopt?
I think that more companies will definitely be receptive towards this as an opportunity. As far as like swinging the full way of the pendulum and that this is the new standard, I'm not entirely sold on that. I think we are social creatures. I think we do want to be around people, and I'm hoping that remote work can also facilitate that. I think I'm excited about it because I think remote work is wonderful to give people that opportunity to have that. There are a lot of jobs though, like service industry or labor jobs, that don't fall into this as an option. And that's a huge marketplace. So I think for the jobs that this makes sense for, I'm hopeful that this will be an opportunity for people.
We're kind of coming towards the end of our conversation. Just a couple of more questions. So according to you, what's the biggest challenge that you faced while hiring remotely? And this is particularly not about remote work in general, but particularly from a recruiting perspective.
Yeah, I think the amount of candidates applying to find quality candidates is truly, like, that seems to be growing as well. There's a lot more people interested in remote work. And like I said at the beginning, the amount of applications that you're going to receive without having location perimeters around it, you'll be very surprised. It's a lot. And I think trying to recreate that in-life experience or in real life experience is always a challenge, and that's something that we're always trying to improve on. you end up picking up so much about a person when you meet them face to face. Even Zoom calls like this, there isn't anything so far that can replicate meeting in person, especially for somebody that you haven't met before. So I think that's a challenge. It's an opportunity as well. It's just kind of the reality that we're living in.
Makes sense. For you, what are the must-have tools for remote hiring?
I always say like the people on your team is like what's going to make or break this experience. But aside from having like good people and a strong internal process and flow of communication, the tools that we've found have been essential are having a good ATS. So we use Lever to receive applications, but then we actually put everything into Close, into our own CRM, and work through candidates just like you would a sales process. And it is a very powerful, wonderful tool that everybody loves using. So we actually use Close internally. And I would say the other two are Calendly. That's been wonderful for scheduling calls, and then this Zoom for hosting interviews. So I think those have been our best tools for recruiting.
Got it. And any job board that you would recommend which helps you get candidates for remote roles?
Yeah, I would say We Work Remotely is a wonderful source of quality candidates, and so is remotive.io. They're a wonderful resource. And lately we've been doing a lot more with LinkedIn, and I think those are probably my top three.
And now, for the final two questions, and this is more about, what's your favorite learning source on remote hiring?
I think Remotive, he puts out such a wonderful newsletter with like curated articles from all these different sources that I think he does a really good job on. And LinkedIn and Twitter have also been growing in my interest lately as good sources for connecting with people and just finding articles and learning from other professionals.
Finally, what's your advice to the recruiters out there on identifying good candidates for a given role? One hack that always works for you.
So I see this a little bit. What I'm always trying to get across is like, keep it human. I think that we sometimes focus so strongly on the skill set, but you also have to focus so much on the person that you're hiring. And I think especially for even more tech roles, you can get really excited about the talent, and that can overshadow you asking the questions of, are they going to be happy here? What is their personality type like? How will they fit into the dynamics of the team? And those are so important. And so those are things that I think sometimes we might turn a blind eye to if the skill set is amazing. And so I always think, make sure you know the skill set and the person that you're bringing on to your organization.
Wonderful advice. So because of that, have you run into conflict issues with the hiring managers? Because sometimes the hiring managers may want to focus, a lot on skill, but have there been instances where you pushed back and say, no, not because the skills are great, but other aspects don't fit in?
I think we've been like this from the start, where we care so much about each other as people that we all kind of are in agreement here. So we all work really well with one another, and we have good communication throughout each step of the process, so that it's never a surprise when we say we're not sure about this, and we support one another quite a bit. So I haven't come up too strongly against any pushback, because we've built a team that we do have robust conversation, but we respect one another's decisions. So
that seems like a wonderful place to be at.
Yeah, it really is. It's a wonderful group of people. Our favorite value is build a house you want to live in, and everybody really stands by that. So
that's so nice to know, and it's must be a wonderful value to have.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So that's about it for the session today, and that brings us to the end of our episode on This Is Recruiting. It was really great talking to you, Mary. Thanks a lot for your time.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure, totally. So I sure have enjoyed speaking with you today, and personally learned a lot of things. And for all of you listening out there, if you've learned something new, please like and share this video to spread the word, and also share your opinions. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel so that we notify you the next time we launch a new episode. Thank you, and see you soon.
Okay.